everyone, welcome to the first illustration of today. There will be 2 more coming in 2-hour intervals, and here we go. So this illustration started by me having specific colors in mind. I wanted to go away slightly from that muted color palette and go to these lavender colors. And so I thought I will select the colors first and then do the illustration. But as you will see, the illustration that will be finished, it's actually not going to work, in my opinion, with those colors. So I'll take a while to debate about the colors and then decide that I'm going to go with the muted color palette still, because in my opinion, it just works better. And also I realized that, there are certain colors that, again, in my opinion, you of course can do it your way, but there are certain flowers that work with other colors better. And so once I finished this illustration, it really did make sense to use the lavender color and that cactus flower colors. So this is another real-time illustration, and I'm starting by really taking my time and illustrating this kind of like a rosebud that's really dense. And at the minute I have roses in my garden. They're a completely different color. They're sort of this beautiful orange with kind of pink speckles, and then they change their color as they go on. And the point is that the shape of the rose is this beautiful ball-like shape that has so many petals that are holding this beautiful flower together. And it's not a rose that opens up outwards. It sort of keeps the petals curled inside, and as the time goes on it does open slightly, but it still remains that beautiful dense petal look to it. So this is where the inspiration came for this little flower. I also exaggerated the little center bits of it and extended them outside of the rosebud here. So the next thing I'm doing here is just doodling some leaves, and it will be a fairly kind of simple illustration. Again, I try all of them to be not overcomplicated, because I think once I overcomplicate the structure here or the composition, it's when, to me, it starts to look a little bit overworked. So I'm still staying within that style. And now I am painting these kind of seed pods, I'd say. Sorry if I'm using kind of. I was actually watching one of the videos from a couple of days ago, and I think I must have said kind of about 50 times. I don't know about you guys, but I was getting irritated myself listening to that. So I don't realize that I say this word so often, but in some videos it's even more than I think. So anyways, yeah, so these are seed pods, which usually happen on a number of flowers. Nigella seeds, I think, happens like that. So once they finish flowering, the seed pod starts to grow. Or also poppies, very similar to that as well. So this is where the inspiration is coming for this doodle flower. And once I've done that, I started thinking, do I want to add anything? Or is that enough? And I will leave it at that. So now moving on to colors, and as I said, I quickly realized that lavender is just not going to work with this rose. I mean, it might have, but in my opinion this needed something more muted. And I even contemplated using that Mayan blue, which is a more muted blue color, and it has a beautiful granulation. But I thought that might be a little bit too experimental in this case. I might try it on one of the other flowers at some point, but I wanted something more traditional and something more classical, I guess, if that's the right word. So I went back to a muted palette. Now this time I'm going to use the color called English Red Earth. It's the one on the corner of that swatch list, which is in the top part of the screen, and it's a lovely color. In some ways I compare it to Potter's Pink, just not as granulating and it has more of a color to it. So it's an interesting one. I haven't used it in a while, but it's a color that actually would work great with a duochrome glaze, and so I think that's what I would be going for. Yeah. And or will I actually? Let me double check, because I have obviously the finished version here. Yes, that's right. Okay, so yes, it's a color that you can really water out to something very pale. It doesn't go too dark when you load it up, and works really well just as a subtle pinky, but more of a muted. It's sort of in between a brown and a pink, I'd say. It's not quite a brown, it's not quite a red, it's not quite a pink, somewhere in the middle of all of those colors, and very subtle if you want it to be subtle. Then I decided to really darken and deepen the center of the flower, because like I said, the English Red Earth can't go too dark, so if you wanted some depth you'd need to use another color, and in this case I'm using the Napthamide Maroon, which we used in the previous illustration. So now I decided to go back into the Iridescent Scarab Red and glaze with that a little bit on top. I think I mentioned this before, but it seems that glazing, I mean the right way of glazing is when you go over a dry surface, so that's a glaze. When you go wet into wet, that's not really glazing, that's just mixing or charging the color in. So I find that the best way these duochromes work is when you actually glaze with them rather than charge them in. So do wait until the first or the initial layer of the watercolor dries, and then only then, if you glaze over it, then the duochromes will be sort of sitting on top of that color, and it does have a transparency to it, so that means that you will still see the original color, but it will come through, the duochrome will come through a lot better, whereas if you charge it into, you'll have a lot more subtle effect. So if you wanted a very little of that duochrome sheen to come through, then you might as well go and charge it into a still wet watercolor. So that's a little tip for you there. And now moving on to the leaves, and I'm going back to QoR Green Gold, and I thought that it works really well with this color palette. I just love this gold green with these kind of muted red tones, and that is pretty much it. I wonder if I added any more. Let me look into my sketchbook. No, I didn't add actually anything at all in terms of pencils or yeah, I didn't use pencils in this illustration, and quite literally the only colors I used are those four. And the only thing I will do is just add a little bit of doodling, those cute little beads as I call them, onto the stalks. I find that it actually adds something to those stalks, because it's just a line, and although I don't want there to be anything else, and I want it to be still light and airy, but yeah, something is a little bit missing, and I find that adding those little beads to it just finishes and ties the whole thing in. So I will let you enjoy the rest of this illustration, and thanks for watching, and I will see you in 2 hours time.